Hello, everybody. I'm going to do your series of Biology 202 lectures on the respiratory system, and this is chapter 22 in your textbook. And I'm going to chop this up into a series of video lectures. I don't know, there might be 3, there might be 4. We'll just kind of see how it goes. I have some ideas about where to chop them up, but I don't want any one lecture to be too long. Yes, I am recording this at home, but hey, that's okay because I got my Calhoun t-shirt on, so we're good. But if you hear anything in the background like screaming teenage girls, those would be my daughters. Or if you hear dogs barking, those would be my 2 dachshunds. So they are here, and I told them to kind of be quiet and hang out in the back of the house while I'm doing these lectures, but we'll see. All right, respiratory system. So you guys will find that the respiratory system is a pretty good follow-up to the cardiovascular system, and some of the physiology aspects about how your body responds and adjust your breathing rate accordingly due to various things that are happening inside your body. They should remind you quite a bit of cardiovascular physiology because, as you guys should remember, one of the main functions of your cardiovascular system is to be sure that oxygen gas is being delivered to all of your tissues and that the carbon dioxide waste that your cells produce due to cellular respiration is being removed. And obviously your respiratory system is going to cooperate with that because the respiratory system is responsible for taking in oxygen from the air and removing carbon dioxide from your blood and sending that back off to the atmosphere. Okay, so to get started here, respiration, that's going to be the topic for the respiratory system, obviously. And that's going to involve cooperation between both your respiratory and your circulatory systems, which that makes sense. And, some of these things you will have heard before. And we're going to see that there are 4 processes that help supply oxygen gas to all of your tissues in your body. All your cells have to have it to do cellular respiration and be able to extract energy from their nutrients to make ATP. And also, the respiratory system is going to be concerned with disposing of carbon dioxide, CO2. So here in Unit 4, you're going to be hearing a lot about carbon dioxide, CO2. This is produced constantly by cells in your body, and it cannot accumulate. It cannot overaccumulate, and it actually can't be present in your body fluids at levels that are too low. And as you guys will learn, that actually winds up influencing the pH of your body fluids. And hopefully you remember that the pH of your body fluids has to stay within a very narrow range, 7.35 to 7.45. And if it doesn't, all of your important biological molecules that are make your cells function and serve as the building blocks for those cells wind up misfolding, losing their 3-dimensional shapes, and pretty soon your cells stop functioning and you croak. So we will be talking about here's a capillary again. Hopefully you remember that from the cardiovascular system. Here are some cells in a random tissue in your body. And as you know, oxygenated blood passes through capillary beds in your tissues, and the oxygen gas gets dropped off. The CO2 waste gets picked up over on the venular end of the capillary, and then that deoxygenated carbon dioxide rich blood is going to be taken back to the lungs so that you can pick up more oxygen and exhale out that CO2. So the 4 processes of respiration, they involve one process that's called pulmonary ventilation. That's what you know as breathing. That's simply the movement of air into and out of your lungs. Then we have what's called external respiration, and that refers to simply the oxygen gas, CO2, carbon dioxide exchange between the air in the lungs and the blood. Respiration also requires transport because oxygen gas and carbon dioxide have to be transported around in your bloodstream through your circulatory system, your cardiovascular system, so that it can be delivered to all of your tissues. And then there's the 4th process is called internal respiration. And that's where you have, like what I was showing you on the last slide, oxygen gas and carbon dioxide get exchanged between the capillaries in your tissues, and the tissue fluids that surround your cells. And another thing to keep in mind, we're not talking about the same processes as cellular respiration that you first learned about in Biology 201. Cellular respiration occurs inside cells, and that is a complex series of chemical reactions that help liberate energy that's stored in nutrients, helps you harness that energy to make ATP. And ATP molecules, as hopefully you guys know by now, those are the fuel molecules that power anything your cells need to do that requires energy input. Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the anatomy of the respiratory system because you should be spending time doing that in your laboratory sessions when you actually meet in person. And so, but here are the main parts that we consider to be the major structures of your respiratory system. Nasal cavity inside your nose. So yes, if you were able to cut your head, slice it in half, sagittal section, and looked at your nasal cavity, you know, it's a pretty big compartment, bigger than we typically imagine. And then you have your pharynx. That is pharynx, not pharynx, which is actually divided up into more than one part, 3 parts that we'll see. That's a passageway from your nasal cavity into the back of your throat, and then from there down toward the trachea and the esophagus. So that structure actually overlaps with your, parts of it actually overlap with your digestive system. The upper portion wouldn't unless you were trying to inhale food through your nose, but the other parts do. Then we're going to, another part you'll need to know is the larynx, which you commonly call your Adam's apple. That's the most superior portion, or just superior to the trachea. That's also where your vocal cords are located. Now, if you're thinking about airflow here, air comes in through your nasal cavity or through your mouth, passes through the pharynx, and it's headed towards your larynx. So it passes through there into the trachea, and then from the trachea, air splits off through bronchi, singular is bronchus, into either your left or your right lung. And then once you get down into the lungs themselves, you guys will see that you have smaller and smaller and smaller bronchial passages that lead to the little tiny air sacs in your lungs where gas exchange actually takes place. Those are called alveoli. Okay, here's a bigger blow up of the structures of the upper respiratory tract. So nasal cavity, and you guys may remember from Biology 201, you've got those little folds on the inside of the nasal cavity called the conchi or conchi. You have a superior, middle, and inferior portion. And those are actually in there, it's believed, to help stimulate air turbulence, so that when you breathe in cold air from the outside, it kind of rolls around in your nasal cavity for a while and warms up before it heads this way down towards your lungs. The pharynx, this upper portion, is actually called the nasopharynx. That's the passageway from your nasal cavity to the back of your throat. That part of the pharynx is called the oropharynx. And then as you move down from there, the lowest portion is called the laryngopharynx. And from the laryngopharynx, if you're food or water, you're going to slide down through the esophagus. If you're air, you're going to head over here through the larynx down into the trachea so you can head off into the lungs. And this little flap-like structure they're showing you there, yes, that does actually flap down and close when you're swallowing food or water. That's called your epiglottis. And that is supposed to help prevent food and water from going down into your larynx and trachea, because that's not too cool when that happens. Let's see, what is your nose doing? Your nose actually has many important functions besides making snot for you. Obviously, that's the first place that air enters under normal circumstances, but of course it also enters through your mouth. And like I was telling you, one of the jobs of those folded structures inside the nose is to make the air kind of roll around in your nose before it passes deeper down toward your lungs. Because if it's 18 degrees outside, you don't want 18-degree air making it down into your lungs and freezing all those little tiny air sacs in there. So all those little hairs in your nose, which of course we guys have a whole lot more of those than the girls do. You know, I'm really irritated that as I've gotten older, I can't grow hair on top of my head, but I can certainly grow plenty of it inside my nose. But maybe I need to figure out a way to transplant that to the top of my head. So all those little hairs help filter and clean the inspired air. Inspiration is another word for inhalation. So get used to that. Inspiration, when you're talking about the respiratory system, will mean inhalation. It's also a resonating chamber for speech. So your nose affects the sound of your speech, which you guys know, because if you hold your nose, that screws up the way your speech sounds. Don't forget about those olfactory receptors that are sitting up along the roof of the nasal cavity that are responsible for your sense of smell. Yeah, the nasal conchae provide turbulence. Don't you just like to say the word conchae or conchae? You can use either of those pronunciations. What about the inside lining of the respiratory tract, really from top to bottom? So from your upper respiratory tract, which is everything above your larynx, your Adam's apple, and on down through your lower respiratory tract. So from your larynx and trachea on down into your lungs. That's called your respiratory mucosa. It's a mucosal membrane. Mucosal membranes are membranes that line the interior spaces of structures in your body that do somewhere along the way have an opening to the outside. So many portions of these respiratory mucosal linings, not all of them, but in many areas, including in the nose and down in the trachea, you have the tissues that form the inside lining are called pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. So you can go back and look in the tissues chapter in the book or back through your Biology 201 notes if you want to review what that type of tissue is. But the cilia are actually important. Those are little hair-like structures that kind of whip back and forth and help sweep inhaled bacteria and dust and other microbes away from the lower respiratory tract. So they help prevent those types of things from getting down deep into your lungs. So all that snotty mucus and fluid in your nose contains enzymes called lysozyme that help attack invading bacteria and other proteins called defensins that also are toxic for bacteria, so that helps keep the numbers of bacteria in the respiratory tract down. Again, those little cilia, those little hairs on the cells that line the portions of the respiratory tract, they wiggle and they're trying to move or sweep substances away from the lower respiratory tract. So they actually sweep them toward the back of your throat, and then the idea is you'll either cough them up or you'll swallow those substances and they'll go sliding down your esophagus down into your stomach, and if there are any little nasty bacteria in there, they're going to get fried by your stomach acid. Okay. We've already talked about the parts of the pharynx, the nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngopharynx, so you can kind of see the division lines there between those three areas. And then this picture from your textbook is giving you a little bit of a closer look at the larynx. So this is your Adam's apple, superior to your trachea, and you're looking at a side view here, obviously, but this is the little flap called the epiglottis that closes over the opening to the larynx, and that closes when you swallow, so that under normal circumstances, you don't have liquids and foods traveling down into your trachea. And the blue structures that you're seeing here, those are the various cartilages that surround your larynx. And again, you'll be taking a closer look at that structure in the laboratory. Some very important features in your larynx are your vocal ligaments, or what we more commonly call your vocal cords. And these are actually stretches of dense connective tissues that have a lot of elastic fibers in them. So elastic fibers are able to rebound these tissues very, very efficiently. And they actually attach a couple of the cartilages within the larynx, and we're not going to worry about the names of those different cartilages because there are quite a few of them. But these vocal ligaments or vocal cords form the core of what are called the vocal folds up in the upper portion of the larynx. They're also known as your true vocal cords. There's an opening between them that's called the glottis. But basically, when you make sounds, you force air up through these vocal ligaments, your true vocal cords, and they vibrate. When you speak, you're forcing air up through them. It causes vibrations in these tissues, and that's what actually produces the sounds that we make. Here's a view of your true vocal cords. If you were looking into somebody's throat from the top down onto the top of the larynx, so here's your opening to the larynx here. Here's your esophagus back here, and this is the base of your tongue. So this person, you're looking at a view where they're holding their tongue up so you can see the vocal cords. So there they are. And as you speak, they open and close, or as you breathe, they open and close to allow air to pass. And the opening between them is what's called the glottis. And again, you will be taking a closer look at that in labs. Voice production, just some information, general information about voice production. When you speak, that's actually intermittent release of expired air. So like inspiration refers to inhalation, expiration refers to exhalation when we're thinking about the respiratory system. So you force this air out, and it opens and closes the glottis with those vocal cords, and the vibrations that they're making actually lead to the sounds that we have. The pitch of your voice is determined by the length and the tension of those vocal cords. So in males, the larynx is larger. That's due to testosterone stimulating the growth of the larynx at puberty. And so that increase in length affects the pitch. Loudness depends upon the force of the air. If you force more air out, you're going to be speaking louder, which just makes sense. And then the chambers above there in your pharynx and your various cavities here, oral, nasal, and even your sinus cavities, help amplify and enhance the sound quality. So that's why if you hold up your nose, things sound a little bit different because you're blocking off one of those chambers. And then learning language and speech, you've got various muscles there around the pharynx and the tongue and your soft palate and your lips and so forth that have to cooperate together so that you can learn how to speak when you're a little bitty kid. Okay, so if you move down from the larynx, and we're heading toward the lungs, you move into the trachea, and if you cut open the trachea and looked at it in a cross section, this is the esophagus back here. Remember, the esophagus is posterior to the trachea. So you would find in here, of course, you've got an epithelial lining. That's those pseudostratified, ciliated, columnar epithelial cells. So those little hairs in there sweep mucus and the bacteria and dust that has been trapped by the mucus back upward toward the back of your throat. Then you have connective tissues within the wall. You have mucus-producing glands that are highlighted here in purple. And in blue, those are the cartilage rings that exist along the outsides of the trachea. This is actually a tissue view. You may have actually looked at the inside lining of the trachea on histological slides when you took Biology 201. But if you didn't, on this is a microscopic view of those tissues. And over here, this is airspace inside the trachea. And right here, this little purple strip right along in here, that's those cells that we call pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. And there you can see those little cilia up on the surface. So that's an actual histological image of a real inside lining of a trachea. So those little cilia are very important. If they become damaged, like say because you smoked a lot throughout your life, that can damage those cilia, and then they're not able to work as well at sweeping things upward and toward the back of your throat, and that can make you more prone to infections. Bacteria and viruses are able to get down into your lungs more easily and cause problems for you. Okay, so if we're thinking about air traveling down the trachea, it's going to branch off into a left or right bronchus. And at first, those are called primary bronchi, and then they branch into slightly smaller branches. And each of those is called a secondary bronchus. And those go into each lobe of the lungs. And you guys will be learning in your laboratory that the left lung has 2 lobes, the right lung has 3 lobes. Those secondary bronchi branch into tertiary bronchi, 3rd level, that are moving into smaller regions of each lobe of the lung. And just kind of like the branches and twigs of a tree, those little branches get smaller and smaller and smaller, and they eventually occupy most of the space inside the lungs. In fact, I might flip over. Yeah, here we go. I should have put this slide a little bit earlier. If you look at this picture from your textbook, this is showing you all of those bronchial passages and how well they infiltrate or pass through each portion of the lung. So it really does kind of look like tree branches that branch into smaller stems and twigs in each area of the lungs. Okay, now finally, when you get to the ends of the smallest bronchi, you move into really tiny ones, and those are called bronchioles. Those lead to even smaller passageways that are called alveolar ducts. So we're getting down to the microscopic level now. And then those lead to clusters, these things that kind of look like brown grape clusters. Those are the alveoli. So those are the little tiny microscopic air sacs where gas exchange is going to take place between the air that you breathe in and the capillaries that surround them. So if you look here at this number, you have 300 million, if you have healthy adult lungs, of these little alveoli that fill up most of the space inside your lungs. All right, I'm actually going to cut off the first lecture video clip for respiratory here because then we're going to start moving into what has to happen for gas exchange to take place between these little alveoli and the tiny blood vessels, the capillaries that surround them.